In this video, we're going to look into understanding the new RPM feature that YouTube has just released, and we're going to compare it to the CPM feature to help you understand your revenue metrics on YouTube. So maybe you've noticed this new feature and you're wondering how it all works, and does your CPM actually mean jack? Well, we're going to talk about that right now. Let's get into the video. How's it going, guys, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Simplicity. Hope you're having a wonderful day. And if you're new to the channel, we're all about building your brand, business, and impact online through social media marketing. So maybe you want to quit that 9-to-5 job, start a side hustle and start working for yourself, then consider subscribing and join the Creator Nation family, where we share my tips and tricks of how you can grow on social media. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Really does help support the channel, helps get the video out there, and helps us to help more people own their life, passion, and dream through social media marketing. Before we do get into the video, if you are new to the channel, there will be poop emojis popping up all over the screen. If you do want to go into the draw to win yourself an iPhone, make sure you watch the full video, count all of those pesky little poop emojis, and then comment that down below once you've counted all of those up. And make sure that you don't just go ahead and cheat and copy someone else's answers, because they will be changing every single hour. So if you want to win, make sure that you count correctly to go into the draw to win yourself an iPhone. So firstly, you may have noticed when jumping onto your YouTube studio, you'll be noticing in your YouTube analytics, there's this new feature called RPM. And you're probably wondering, what on earth is RPM and why do I need it when I already have my CPM? Well, if you don't know what CPM is, it stands for cost per milli, which is a fancy way of saying cost per 1,000 views. Now, what YouTube doesn't tell you, or you may not have been aware of, is this average figure that it gives you is the average cost that an advertiser is paying to put advertisements on your videos. So that average figure that you're getting is the average cost that an advertiser is paying, dividing that by the monetized playback views, and then timesing that by 1,000 to give you a nice figure for per 1,000 views. Now let's break this down. So firstly and foremost, this only takes into consideration your monetized playback CPM, which means it only includes views that actually had ads in them. So what I mean by this is a person who watched your video and actually saw and watched an ad, that is what we call a monetized playback view. What you don't realize is, even if your video had, let's say, 100,000 views, but only 70,000 of those were considered monetized playback views, that means 30,000 people either one, didn't watch the ads, or two, YouTube didn't play those ads for those 30,000 people. So you're only going to receive money based on the ads that they watched. So the advertiser is only going to pay for ads that played on your video, and therefore you only get paid for the monetized playback views. So that's how CPM is calculated. It's the average cost that an advertiser is paying YouTube to have their ads on the YouTube platform. So they work out your average monetized playback CPM based on the cost that the advertiser is paying, dividing that by the amount of monetized playback views for your total channel, and then timesing that by 1,000 gives you your CPM. Now you're thinking, okay, I understand what CPM, so then what on earth is RPM? Well, RPM stands for revenue per milli. And to understand RPM, we need to work out first how it's calculated. So RPM is the average revenue that you're receiving, that YouTube is paying you, dividing that by your total views. So that's all of your views, whether they're monetized or had ads playing on them, divide that by your total views, and then timesing that by 1,000 to giving you that per milli per 1,000 amount. Now you're thinking, that sounds awfully very similar to CPM. But to truly understand how RPM is different and is actually more accurate to what you're actually receiving per 1,000 views, what you may not be aware of, your CPM, as I said, is what your advertiser is paying. But what you don't realize, or you may not be aware of, is that YouTube takes a cut of that. Obviously they're a business and they're not going to just give you all of the money that their advertisers are paying. So what you may not be aware of is for every $1 that the advertiser pays, YouTube takes a 45% cut of that dollar. So they take 45 cents of every dollar of monetized playback views. So what this means is your RPM is that 55% of every dollar. So that 55 cents of every dollar that that advertiser has paid for. So you can already see that your RPM is going to have 45% deducted from the CPM to give you your RPM. But it's not quite as simple as that. It's a little bit more complicated. Your RPM is that amount that YouTube is paying you once they've taken their cut. You get that 55 cents of every dollar, and then they're dividing that by your total views. So all of the views on your video, whether they're unlisted, whether they're monetized, whether a viewer actually viewed ads in those views. It takes all of those views into consideration to give you a much more accurate average RPM to determine how much money you're making on your videos. So the reason they've released RPM is it's a much better way of understanding how much money you're actually making per 1,000 views on all of your videos, as opposed to just the monetized playback views. Not only does RPM include ads, but it also includes premiums, YouTube memberships, it includes super chats, and it includes super stickers. All of these revenues that you can obtain through YouTube is included in your RPM, whereas CPM did not include super chats, super stickers, memberships, and premiums. So the RPM is going to give you a more accurate, true figure of how much YouTube is paying you per 1,000 views, and this is all determined based on taking the cut that you actually receive, the amount that you are actually receiving from the ads on your videos, and it also includes the memberships and the premiums and the super chats and super stickers that you're receiving from your audience. So we can see that the RPM is definitely a lot more accurate, and it's going to give you a better representation of how much money you're actually receiving per 1,000 views. The other issue that CPM has, that's why they've updated it to the RPM, is, as I did say before, CPM only includes monetized playback views, which you're probably thinking, how is that bad? That means it's giving me an accurate CPM figure. And in some aspects that is true, because it's only going to include those monetized playback views. So those views that had ads in them that the advertiser will have to pay for, and you'll receive your 55% of that monetized playback view. But the problem with this, if you take it in two different examples, let's say you had one video and let's say 70% of that video had monetized playback views, and therefore your CPM was pretty high. Then let's take another example and you actually had a 99% monetized playback views. Those CPMs are actually going to be quite different, when in reality, when we look at our RPM, the new metric of how much we're actually receiving, those two amounts wouldn't actually be a huge difference. But your CPM is skewed because one is taking into consideration all of the ads revenue, the whole amount that the advertiser is paying, not taking out the cut that YouTube takes. And then secondly, it's only including the monetized playback views. So it skews it in a way that makes your CPM seem higher than it actually is, and can be misleading in terms of what you're actually going to receive from that video. So when you're trying to compare your videos to see what video is doing better, you might be like, wow, this video has a really high CPM, whereas this one has a much lower one. You can't truly understand why. That's because the CPM isn't quite as accurate as YouTube was hoping it would be, and that is why they've introduced the RPM. Now, although RPM is definitely a lot more accurate, it also does miss a few things. What isn't included in RPM? Now, RPM does not include YouTube merchandise sales. It doesn't include sponsorships. It doesn't include affiliate marketing. It doesn't include brand deals. So anything that you technically are being paid outside of YouTube, your RPM isn't going to include this. So it's not going to give you an accurate representation of what that YouTuber is actually receiving in all of their income streams, but it is at least going to show you, as we said before, your ad revenue, your membership revenue, your premiums revenue, and your super chat and super stickers revenue. So it does give you a bigger picture of your revenue, but as I said, if you are a well-established YouTuber and you have other avenues of income, obviously the RPM isn't going to include those figures. So as RPM becomes more and more used, and we can start to compare our RPM on video to video, it's definitely going to give us a better representation of how much that video is actually making, and now it's also going to include other figures that wouldn't have been included in the CPM. So what does this tell you if you have a CPM and you have your RPM, and your RPM actually is going up and your CPM is basically staying the same? What this is telling you, this is actually telling you that your subscribers, that your viewers are investing more in you and less in the advertisers. This means there could be more memberships, more premiums, more super chats, and more super stickers that your audience is investing in you as opposed to your advertiser. So you can really start to compare your metrics, and if you can see your RPM is increasing and your CPM isn't, that means that your audience is investing more in you, showing that they really care about what you're creating and they want to help you to keep growing and invest in you. So an RPM is a really great way to see how your YouTube channel is actually doing, and it's a great way to see the exact amount that YouTube is paying you per 1,000 views to give you a more accurate representation of your YouTube revenue. And the question of the day, let me know in the comment section down below if you've even heard of RPM and what you think of this new feature. Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing? Let me know in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Overall, I think it is a great feature because it's going to give you a more accurate representation of how much YouTube is actually paying you per 1,000 views for the ads on your videos, and helps to show you exactly how much you're receiving per 1,000 views to help you learn what videos are actually getting more money for less views, and helps you to understand how you can make more money and how to learn how to increase your RPM to receive more money per 1,000 views. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Make sure that you do subscribe if you haven't already. And I know if you did love this video, you'll love these other videos, and I'll see you there. Peace out.